So speaking of coverage of global news in U.S. outlets, um, Nathan is of course the editor of Current Affairs until very recently. He was also a columnist for The Guardian. I don't know if this is recent enough. I don't know if his Twitter bio has been updated yet. So this is and this is a significant thing. I should say. You wrote an article about this in Current Affairs. People can read for some of the details. I think Forrest has that too as a graphic. But I think some people maybe have the very mistaken impression that if they see someone's name a lot and there's some sort of media organization attached to them, that they are just like rolling in money from this. Being the editor of Current Affairs means that you have like the Scrooge McDuck pool of gold coins to swim around in.
There's an impression that left media is far more lucrative than left media in fact is.
Yeah, so this is like a significant portion of your income is what you're getting from.
It's about a quarter. Yeah, I did the column. So I made about $15,000 a year from The Guardian.
Yeah. And this is also, I thought it'd be good to have a little overlap from Shaun, because when they fired you, part of their explanation of it, when they ended up acknowledging the issue and publicly acknowledging it, the original email from the Guardian editor said private and confidential, which I think is a classic.
Not anymore.
Which is a classic thing to say, when you're firing somebody for for extremely controversial reasons, that you just lost your job. By the way, don't tell anyone.
I think it's this email, right? This is the one.
That's the second email. That's the email I sent. That's the toadying. Obsequious email I sent in reply to his original email, where I realized that my job is on the line and promised to delete the tweets and behave. Didn't make a difference, but
so when they did publicly acknowledge this, part of what they said is, yeah, okay, sure, he was a columnist, he's no longer a columnist, and yeah, it was totally because of this tweet, which we'll get into what the tweet was, but said that, but they're not firing you. That was what they said, because you don't have a real contract, which is an interesting.
Well, this is why it's kind of interesting to have Shaun here, because it struck me. My first thought was this was an issue about the Palestine exception to free speech, which is very much true in the media. But as I was writing the article and thinking about exactly what happened, it was also very clearly a story about just employer power, and a kind of fascinating example of how that works in media, where when the editor emailed me and said, I'm very dissatisfied with your tweet, I realized that basically I had a choice where I needed to either delete that tweet fast or lose my job. He didn't say you were going to lose your job. He just made sure that it's clear that he was pissed. And I think, well, are these tweets worth $15,000 a year to me? Would I pay that? Would I lose that money to keep these tweets? And I don't want to die on the hill of a joke tweet. And so I look back and I realize just how panicked I was, realizing that the Guardian essentially had complete control. If they told me they didn't want me to tweet something, there was very little I could do unless I was prepared to just say, go fuck yourself. I don't need the money. And the fact is that I was only able to write about this in such detail and really just burn my bridges and torch the place because I have another gig. I have Current Affairs, and it pays me enough money that I can live on, and I don't need another newspaper column. But that's about right. That's power, right? I had an independent source of power in the form of money. And so I could do that, but the Guardian really had such control over me. And the Guardian is unionized, right? The staff, the full-time staff, have a union, but the columnists don't. We don't have contracts. They can fire us anytime. And in the statement they put out, they go like, he says he was fired. He wasn't fired. We terminated him as a columnist, but they have no job security.
Yeah, and this is, and of course, as non-trivial, as this is for for somebody in your position. I mean, like actually, I think reading the story, I started feeling a little physically panicky because I could over-identify with with what this might feel like, sort of stringing together a bunch of things that none of them have that kind of job security, but this also, of course, as you say, you're in a relatively okay position compared to a lot of people. And this is something that's been a theme of a lot of Shaun's work, is that that the labor movement should more aggressively pursue maybe legal strategy in some contexts, certainly at least the rhetorical strategy of talking about free speech in the workplace.
And I mean, and just like the idea that you have a right to your job is, I think, a thing that we lost. A lot of the early labor movement in America was based on the idea of like, you owe me something, boss. Like, you can't just like, oh, we're done, you're out of here. And so I think some of that, I think a lot of that notion did actually like wind up in the 13th Amendment, the one outlawing slavery and involuntary servitude. It was this notion we were fighting for. And in the drafting of the original National Labor Relations Act in 1935, it was actually a real fight. And again, back to the AFL and the CIO being opposing labor institutions, the CIO being closer to Roosevelt and looking for big sort of institutional change, whereas the AFL had more of this tradition of like, no, workers have rights, and the AFL was fighting for, you should root the NLRA in the 13th Amendment, and we should be fighting for a right to your job. And it's completely gone. And partly in America, and like in America, our rights are even worse than those in the UK. Partly because, we had such a smashing success in those New Deal years and in the World War II years where, job security got tied to a union contract. And we got to the point where, 1 in 3 workers had a union. And so the other 2 out of 3, most employers just sort of matched those benefits. And so people generally had job security in this country because it was just the right thing to do, or the smart thing to do, or the thing to do not to get sued. And that has clearly gone away. And it's got, in the last, in this century, employers have been acting with impunity to the point where this idea of just cause as a job right is gaining traction. In the UK, I think that it is a law on the books, but the UK has been drawing from America's labor laws to find all these carve-outs, right? And this is, as we're debating this idea of we just got job protections, just cause protections for like a couple thousand fast food workers in New York City. And, we're going to see how enforcement works on that. California, the great liberal mecca, is terrified to introduce this. We're so far from that. But what we're seeing in the rest of the world are these sort of neoliberal carve-outs to this notion of a universal job protection. And the employers are just having a field day with it.
Have you read Capitalist Realism by Mark Fisher? Shaun?
I haven't.
Oh, well,
he
has this theory in it. Well, not theory, but he's talking about like the idea of post-Fordism being like that 70s moment where kind of the manufacturing industry starts to deindustrialize, and also kind of the idea, I guess, the propaganda and the idea that workers are kind of taught, like workers kind of think, well, bosses kind of propagandize to workers that they don't need job security as much as they kind of need options. And there's the idea that kind of in some way, like the propaganda kind of got to workers as well.
Flexibility, I think they call it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all out there, but also it's all such clear horseshit at this point. Like, I mean, even before COVID, unemployment rates were so low that it's like, all of our spreadsheets and our economic theorems indicate that people should be getting raises, but it's like, yeah, except one company concentrates its jobs in one shithole, county in Mississippi, and then you have monopsony power, and like people have there is no mobility when there's one boss in the city. Like we've reinvented the company town.
Yeah. Oh man, we should have thrown in monopsony in the Glenn Beck article when we were teaching basic economics.
There we go. I always like it when economists are trying to puzzle out. Well, it says here that wages should be increasing, but they're not.
Which is just like, I mean, just hand them the Oscar at that point. Like, it's just really great acting. Like, are you kidding me? Do you really believe this?
It's also what happens when you detach class as a concept and when you detach kind of power from economic theories.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, things aren't within, it's within it's within employers' interest not to give raises, to make the most money possible. And and if you're not thinking that way, if you're not worker, money should be going up, and it's but not if someone decides it's not in their interest and has all the power in that situation.
Yeah, and not if and some of this is also just you have these very simple a priori models that in all sorts of ways don't map on in any kind of micro way to the real world, the same way that the models will say that people that companies will respond to increased demand with short-term price increases, and they'll really just respond by leaving a lot of unfilled orders in the warehouse for a while. But in this case, it is certainly an issue about class power. But I of course. Oh, sorry, Shaun. Did you want to jump in before we?
Yeah, one of the main things I'm really pressing on in my book is how we have to get these sort of all-in systems of labor rights and representation, because as much if things are based upon your right is tied to your job, this is where these things start to flow down, right? And there's a union at the Guardian. Right, but they can find these carve-outs. Whereas if you could find ways where it's this is what every writer deserves for this whatever economic tier that this publication falls into, and there's going to be courts involved in enforcing them, that gets a lot closer, and so much of what went wrong with labor in America was everything was tied to the job. And because the courts carved out these major loopholes where the bosses could, they were entitled to make these major decisions about their economic bottom line, things got subcontracted, things got offshored, things got, farmed out, and it just carves out. And so even as we're in this moment where we're gently starting to slide into this debate of do workers deserve just cause protections? The whole framework in America is still one where it's it should be based upon the job that you're at and based upon whether you are technically classified as a full-time worker. And it's well, that's how we just all are going to wind up as freelancers, and it doesn't matter anyway.
It also leads to the Biden thing, I guess, where his big concern trolling thing about Medicare for all was oh, do you really want to give up your union health care that you fought so hard for?
I'm less mad at him than I am at the Mayo Pete. I think Mayo Pete was the most dishonest fucking grub in that whole debate. I mean, everything about was just so
No argument from me.
so dishonest.
Yeah.
And also, like, I mean, I worked for a labor center where, like, building trades apprentices are learning on the job and earning a college degree simultaneously. And, like, his whole, like, oh, it's one or the other. It's like, no, it's not. Get the hell out of here.
Yeah, and I should mention, by the way, small tangent, but for I think the definitive Mayo Pete article was.
I hated him so much. I wrote 10,000 words about him. I started reading his memoir.
Way more than you deserve.
I don't know if there's anyone in politics I've hated more than this man.
Yeah.
By the way, how does he deserve a memoir? Like, who the fuck is publishing this? Like, at the time he ran, he already had a memoir.
Bestseller for us. It's sold.
Yeah. So yeah, that article is all about Pete. But I will say, though, on the subject of Biden's use in the primary of that argument that Medicare for all means that you're going to lose your union health insurance coverage, what I immediately thought of is, having read this book, Tell the Bosses We're Coming by Shaun Richmond, I know that part of the reason why the labor movement switched gears from their previous strategy and started bargaining for health insurance was the unfortunately very mistaken belief that if employers were saddled with having to provide insurance themselves, they would stop opposing single-payer national health insurance because they would have an economic incentive to support it.
Well, it wasn't quite that. Actually, Nelson Lichtenstein digs up this amazing quote from, like, the 1948 CIO convention. It's in his biography of Walter Reuther. And it's, Walter Reuther and the CIO unions were really wedded to a social democratic vision of expanding Social Security to cover healthcare. And one of the things that happened during the war is that during that wage freeze, the War Labor Board said, well, but you can bargain for fringe benefits. And it was mostly the AFL unions that bargained for fringe benefits, and it's mostly the AFL unions that started getting health care covered by employers. The CIO unions held out for a really long time, 1947, 1948, where they're just like, and maybe 1950, like, by the time that, like, Eisenhower is president, and so you got a Republican House and you got a Republican president, and it's just like, we're not going to touch the Social Security Act for a number of years. And a delegate on the floor says, we can't wait 10 more years. We have to start bargaining for health insurance in the next round of contracts. And that's what's amazing to me is our American national solution to healthcare was a 5-year compromise on a 10-year problem. And now you got like Mayor Pete and Biden holding it out as like this like like this is what we're about. This is why we did it. It's like, no, it was it was a patchwork. It was never meant to be this. And
that was an argument, though, that was used. I'm remembering that, right? Like, or did I just make that up for the book when the CIO came around that employers would support national health insurance if they had to pay for it?
I'm not recalling that. It could be. I mean, it's been a while since I could forget. Definitely. I mean, the unions that negotiated health insurance were in the 1960s at the forefront of fighting for the original Medicare Act. And part of this was like, oh, if we could get our 65 plus people off of our healthcare plans, it's going to save us a bunch of money. And that was like a little bit of a deal with the devil in the 65 Medicare Act. But in terms of unions today, the dynamic that I see is there are unions that have these sort of multi-employer healthcare plans that give them real power and actually aid in their organizing. And then there's unions that bargain healthcare one-on-one with their employer, where they just deal with healthcare as a thing that's thrown on the table as a concessionary item on day one. And so, we saw the culinary union, Local 227 of Unite Here, sort of try to come at Bernie during the primaries on this issue. And they're a winner in the healthcare politics of the United States. That any non-union hotel, restaurant, or casino in Las Vegas, if they sign with the union, they probably save money on their healthcare costs. And I knew this from New York. I used to work for the New York Hotel Trades Council, where, if it was a hotel that had 100 employees and it was non-union, and we went on strike against them, we came to them. It was like, here's the actuarial tables, and we could save you like $5 an hour in healthcare cost if you sign with us. It was this major gain. Meanwhile, like if you're in the Communication Workers of America and you're bargaining with Verizon and that's your only employer, Verizon comes in on day one saying, copay, this is how much more the premiums are costing us. We think you should pay us $1,000 more a year. Here's what your copay should be, et cetera, et cetera. So it is like a real winners and losers system. I am firmly convinced that if we don't have Medicare for all, it's going to be very difficult for the labor movement to gain new members and to win new shops. But the power politics of the AFL-CIO, it's really dominated by the unions that are winners under the healthcare system. Unions that have these multi-employer healthcare systems where it actually does help them organize. That said, my good friend just became the president of the New York Hotel Trades Council Union, and there are very few hotel workers with jobs right now. And I know that he spent 6 or 7 months doing round the clock bargaining over healthcare premiums to keep their healthcare clinics. They pay the doctors. The doctors are on salary for this joint labor management fund. And it took everything in them. And I think they eventually, they worked out some deal where everybody's going on Medicaid. One day when he's not still doing round the clock bargaining over healthcare, I want to get him out for drinks and just see if he still thinks this is working for them. Because unions like that are the ones you got to flip to get the entire AFL-CIO to say, we need Medicare for all because this is killing us. Because it is actually killing us. But it's killing some of us quicker than others.
Well, on that note,
we're all going to die.
Shaun, this is great. You've got to come back a bunch of times. Please, everybody, buy his book. It is Tell the Bosses That We're Coming. You can buy it, I know, from I think you can buy it from all the usual places. You can buy it from Powell's, I think, which is at least a union shop. You could
directly from Monthly Review Press.
Directly from Monthly Review Press. You can buy it from Red Emma's, which is a worker-owned bookstore in Baltimore. You can buy books from online. But everybody buy Shaun's book. Shaun, please do come back very soon. Known Shaun for a very long time.
Please come back to my dining room table the first chance you get.
Yeah.
Let's do some Trivial Pursuit or something.
Yes. Post-plague, we will absolutely do that.
In the future when all is well.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Thanks, brother.
All right.